I'm just curious, and this is yes or no. Is Trump's name ever mentioned in Project 2025? Yes or no? Just yes or no. I got you. I got you.
Within the document itself,
yes.
There are a number of references to the former administration.
So is Trump's name mentioned just one time?
I believe it's mentioned more.
Okay. 5 times.
I haven't counted.
Oh, okay. Well, if I told you that his name is mentioned approximately 312 times, would you have any reason to dispute that?
I don't have any reason to.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's interesting that we want to try to pretend. We're not going to pretend in here. We're going to work with facts and not fiction.
I'll ask you, Mr. Kerkorian, and I know you're a Project 2025 board member, your recent quote from a few years ago where you said, quote, Haiti is so screwed up because it wasn't colonized long enough, end quote. Is that correct? Did you say that?
I'm happy to talk about that all you want.
You did say it, that's right.
I wrote it, yes.
You said that. Haiti was colonized as a slave plantation colony. The French colonized Haiti so that slaves would work on plantations. The end of colonization in Haiti was so that the people there would no longer be slaves. So what you're saying, and I read your quote, and anybody watching this online should go read it. What you're saying is it would have been good if they'd stayed colonized, which means that it would have been good if they had stayed enslaved by the French.
In the long run, it's one of the
in the long run,
history. No,
people shouldn't have been enslaved a single day. I'm reclaiming my time, Chairman.
And they had every right. They had every right to throw the.
What
French
you said
out.
is that you would have wanted them. Reclaiming my time. I'm talking now.
They would have been freed 30 years later, and they would have been in the same situation.
You're saying you wanted 30 more years of slavery in Haiti. Reclaiming my time.
I did not.
You just said it. Honestly, it adds up. You said that they would have benefited from the French influence.
In
the French were the ones.
Like the people in Martinique and
reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. I'd like my time back. Please,
enslaved.
My time. This is my time, Mr. Kerkorian.
They are much better off.
Honestly,
now
this all
Haiti
starts
was.
to add up. This all starts to add up. You continue to do this, disseminate writings of white nationalists, try to rationalize, for example, Haiti being colonized for 30 more years. You're a Project 2025 board member. In Project 2025, I couldn't figure out why on page 583, it advocates for not allowing racial disparity or gender disparity to be considered discrimination legally anymore. In Project 2025, it eliminates a 50-year-old executive order that prohibits discrimination in federal jobs. On page 586, Project 2025 advocates for Donald Trump to allow businesses to discriminate based on religious beliefs. Before today, I couldn't understand why Trump's Project 2025 could advocate for ending civil rights protections. Why would Trump's Project 2025, I know there's crazy stuff in here, but I couldn't get why it would advocate for ending protections against discrimination. But now I understand. We have Project 2025 board members here who are the directors of groups that the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated as a hate group. We have people that are on the board that developed this who have said, for example, that Haitians would have been better off with more influence from their enslavers.
Yes or no? As a main author of Project 2025, are you aware of this 4th pillar playbook?
Well, to be...
Yes or no?
To be clear, I'm here in my official capacity.
Yes or no?
So I don't want to have any confusion
I'm reclaiming
on that.
my time. You are under oath, and I don't want you to filibuster. Yes or no, are you aware of this 4th pillar playbook?
Okay, just so I can be clear, that writing that I did was in my personal capacity after getting the...
Reclaiming my time, I didn't ask you that. Are you aware of the 4th pillar playbook, and can you detail, as you are under oath, what exactly it calls for?
Again, I've not seen this 4th pillar playbook that you're talking about.
Moving on. I find it hard to believe that you don't know the details of this 100. Well, please, you are under oath, and do not waste my or the public's time.
I'm happy to talk about all of the policy ideas that I've talked about. I've talked about them in that context. I've talked about them otherwise.
I want to talk about the 100-day playbook, the 4th pillar. Can you elucidate us to that?
Again,
all right, I'm moving on, sir.
I must say I find that surprising. Rarely in the history of this committee or any other have I seen an objection to unanimous consent report for documents regardless of party submitting to it. I do not object to Republican submissions as opposed, personally opposed as I am to them on their grounds, including when I think they're factually incorrect. So I find that extraordinarily disappointing.
Chairman, may I ask for a unanimous consent request, please? Since Mr. Graves has invited it, I think this is probably a good time to enter all 920 pages of the of Trump's Project 2025 into the record, where you can see on page 61, for example, the call for giving project proponents more control over regulatory clocks, page 524, for example, which rescinds the Biden rules and reinstates Trump rules under CEQ reforms. For NEPA, page 533, for example, where the Department of Interior is mandated to reinstate secretarial orders under the Trump administration, including time and page limits on NEPA documents. Page 533, for example, where consideration of eliminating judicial review and the challenges to the adequacy of NEPA documents, it goes on, and I would request unanimous
Reserving
consent.
the right to object.
I object also.
Reserving the right to object. Mr. Chairman, I have a question. How many trees would it take to print that? I'm just...
And they didn't even print the secret fourth pillar that's their radical emergency orders for the first 180 days. It's a great question.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think President Trump and his campaign has denied any dealings with 2025. Last night he said in the debate that he never has read it, nor does he want to read it. So to say
he says
that
some parts
Trump,
are good.
Excuse me, I've got the floor. To say that this is his project, I think is wrong, and it's wrong to enter it into the records.
Mr. Chairman, this is about this committee not even waiting for Donald Trump, actually proceeding now to implement parts of Project 2025. I can't imagine anything more relevant given the subject matter of this hearing, so I will request unanimous consent to enter it into the record so we can demystify this for Mr. Graves and others who seem to think that there's not a direct line.
So is there objection to entering the 2025 report that is not the Trump report as stated by Mr. Huffman?
Just written by Trump's complete inner circle, but yes.
Yes. There is objection.
Given the fact that Representative Huffman was not allowed to submit his unanimous consent on Project 2025, perhaps we should talk about it a little bit more. President Trump denied association with it last night. He also said a lot of other things. He talked about eating pets and transgender operations on migrants in prisons, and he talked about being the leader of fertilization. I mean, his denial doesn't really carry much weight here. The fact of the matter is that the Heritage Foundation, which has drafted Project 2025, has had a history documented of extraordinary influence over the Trump administration, including those individuals that were part of his administration, as well as the broader agenda of the Republican Party, which is what we're seeing play out here today.
I share my colleague AOC's just absolute shock a few moments ago. If you roll back the tape, I saw something. I have worked in the federal government for over a decade, and I have never seen anyone object to a unanimous consent to put evidence into the record. I hope people will take note of that. I've never seen that before. And we had multiple members object to putting Project 2025 in the record today. And what's shocking about that, truly shocking, is first of all, it doesn't even have to be in the record, you guys. It's online. You can just Google it. It's right here. And if you read it, AOC actually read from page 61 of this report, which was written by Donald Trump's OMB director. The section on CEQ is specifically about the provisions that are in the bills that are on this agenda today. It literally is calling for the things that are in this bill. That is literally what it says. You can read it. It's right here online. And not only does it say that it should implement what Donald Trump did during his administration, it says right here on page 61 it should go further. It says that it should use the judicial review that the Supreme Court just put into place by overturning Chevron deference to make it possible for the administration to go further. So when my friends across the aisle, and I respect and I want to work with you all on a bipartisan basis, say that Project 2025 has nothing to do with what's happening here today, it has everything to do with what's happening here today, because it's all right here in this document. So I'm just genuinely shocked. I hope people will replay the clip over and over again of the objection that just happened here a few moments ago, because I have never seen that happen.
Mr. Berry, Chapter 18 of the Project 2025 manifesto is about the Department of Labor, and you are the author of that chapter, correct?
Lead author, yes. There's others too.
Yes, you are. I believe the American public should know exactly how you and the Republican majority that invited you to testify today want to sabotage the EEOC, rewrite the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and push all of us back to an era of Jim Crow racism. I'm shocked that my colleague across the aisle was in disbelief at our characterizations and assertions of racism and discrimination when even former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said the Republican side of the aisle looked like the most restrictive country club in America. We all know that Make America Great Again is about making America white only again.
I also want to look at an alternative plan for your agency. Now, this is Project 2025, which is Donald Trump's anti-environmental agenda. And I want to just note some of the main features of Project 2025. It includes shredding pollution regulations, gutting clean energy programs, repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, President Biden's climate law, which we know is landmark, and of course, empowering corporate polluters. Now, we know that Donald Trump's Project 2025 destroys the EPA. He'll let corporations dump more toxins into our air and water like he did the last time he was president. We know that he will empower corporate polluters and fill the EPA with hand-picked extremists rather than actual climate experts. And he will destroy the progress that President Biden has fought for. Now, he is promising to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. And let's be clear, repealing the bill doesn't just mean reversing the historic progress that we have made. It means threatening jobs and businesses all over the country. Over 1,000 projects already are underway, deploying hydrogen, hydropower, wind, batteries, solar energy, which will all make us more green and independent and really leading us to a greener future. That's also hundreds of thousands of jobs. And we know why he's pushing this dangerous agenda.
In some places in our country, the District of Columbia included, they allowed non-citizens to vote in local elections. This legislation corrects this trend for elections on the federal level, requiring states to obtain proof of United States citizenship and identity before votes are cast. Americans' faith in our national elections has declined precipitously over the last 2 election cycles. To restore that faith, we must work to protect American voters and the integrity of those very elections.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about Project 2025 lately, the Republican plan to dismantle the government, get revenge on their political adversaries, weaponize the White House, and install Trump as a dictator. The former president recently made a laughable attempt to try to distance himself from its extremism, and what do you know? Now Project 2025 is right here on the House floor, because it's what Republicans actually believe. That's what this SAVE Act is about. It is a voter suppression bill that lays the groundwork for them to undermine the next election so they can justify another January 6th style attempt to seize power even if they lose.
Mr. Berry, you're the co-author of Project 2025, the labor section, am I correct?
The lead author on that section, correct.
Go down this list.
I want to get some facts out. There's been so much conversation about who's for working families and what we're going to do for the working class. I just want to get some facts out. In that report, you call for the repeal of Davis-Bacon and say that Congress should enact a law that makes it illegal to pay prevailing wage for union employees. Is that correct?
I appreciate the chance to correct the record. That is actually not correct. The draft, the chapter expresses no view. There is an alternative view, not attributable.
So you don't think there should be a repeal of Davis-Bacon?
The chapter does not take a position.
Do you have a view of whether there should be a repeal?
Honestly, I think it's complicated, and I don't.
Okay.
I don't
do you? Know. In the chapter, it says that you should end project labor agreements and project labor requirements. Is that correct?
Same issue, Congressman.
You don't agree with that, or you say that the report doesn't call for that?
The chapter does not speak to the issue directly. There's a dissent that does. I don't take a position.
What about the rescinding of regulation prohibiting the discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, transgender status, and sex characteristics? Do you believe that we should be repealing any regulations to prevent discrimination on that?
I'm blanking on exactly which regs we're talking about, but yes, I support what is in there on those issues, yes.
Mr. Wray, today I want to focus on the role of the FBI and the need for the Bureau to remain politically neutral and independent. The FBI cannot and should not be subject to the whims of any president. The majority apparently doesn't think that the FBI needs to be politically neutral and independent. They want an FBI subordinate to the president, not accountable to the American people. That is one part of a larger plan to undermine our democracy, to remove the checks and balances that have protected us, and ultimately to subvert our freedoms. That agenda, promulgated by the former president, his loyalists, and their MAGA allies, is called Project 2025. It is publicly available online. I encourage everyone who's watching this to Google it. It includes plans to undermine every part of our government, including the FBI. Trump's Project 2025 agenda says that the director of the FBI must not be independent of politics, but instead must do whatever the president orders. Under Trump's Project 2025, Trump loyalists would undermine the non-political and independent structure of the FBI. Project 2025 openly calls on the next conservative administration to support, quote, a vast expansion of the number of political appointees in every office across the DOJ, especially the FBI. And so, Mr. Wray, given your extensive experience as a law enforcement professional at DOJ across multiple Republican and Democratic administrations, why do you think it's important that the FBI maintain political independence from the president?
I think the FBI is and needs to stay independent, and that means protecting the American people without fear or favor, upholding the Constitution and the rule of law, and it means following the facts wherever they lead, no matter who likes it. And I add that last part because the essence of independence and objectivity is not that an investigation is going to always yield the result you want. Our independence and objectivity can't only be respected when you like the outcome. That's the very essence of objectivity. Sometimes you're going to like the result, sometimes you're not going to like the result. And that applies to everyone, including us. Any number of times we're disappointed and frustrated by the results of our investigations. But the alternative is an erosion of the rule of law, where the only thing that distinguishes one investigation from another is power. And that's what you see in some of authoritarian countries around the world. So I'm not familiar with this particular
no, I didn't ask you to
Project
comment on that.
2025 thing. I don't know anything about it, but what I can tell you is, from my perspective, the FBI needs to be functioning as independent. Doesn't mean it's not part of the executive branch. It doesn't mean the FBI director doesn't serve at the pleasure of the president, but it does mean that the way we do our work
has to be
independent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to appreciate for a moment that this hearing my Republican colleagues have called is about incompetence and failure of our federal government, when failure is exactly what they want to happen. Incompetence is their MO. The same Congress that can't pass a rules vote, can't pass a government funding bill, coming after the administration that has actually passed historic pieces of legislation like CHIPS and science and the Inflation Reduction Act and the infrastructure bill and an actually productive Congress. But when we talk about keeping the government functioning, let's be real. The people who are actually keeping things afloat are not my colleagues, thank God. And it's not even the president. It's our federal workforce. It's the hardworking career professionals across our agencies that work to improve our air quality and our water quality. They work to ensure that our medications are safe to take, that Social Security checks get to folks on time, and that our veterans can live with dignity and comfort after their service. These are regular folks who know how to get their job done day in and day out to serve the American people. There's a reason why these people are career professionals. There's a reason why they're not partisan shills. They have the right experience and knowledge to properly do their jobs. Yet Trump and the Republican Project 2025, whoever wrote it, whoever endorses it, it exists, wants to get rid of these workers and replace them with people whose only qualification is their loyalty and their financial support to Donald Trump. So while I would argue that my colleagues in the minority have in the majority have not proven competence, dismantling our government agencies is not incompetence, it's intentional. They're purposefully creating dysfunction. We've seen this in action as money pours into our elections, as our Supreme Court justices are wined and dined, and then given increasingly radical rulings. And now with their plan to gut these federal agencies and fill them with partisan hacks. They are purposefully shifting the balance of power to one man, Donald Trump, the same man who promised to be a dictator on day one, his words. So, Ms. Perryman, when we talk about replacing these career federal workers with Trump loyalists, who is actually benefiting? And if it's not the American people, then who do we see gaining the most from these policies?
I'm glad that you have raised this, especially in this committee where there's been a lot of conversation about waste, fraud, and abuse, because what we know is that when governments function without a career civil service, when governments function with high levels of appointees that have to be loyal to a particular ideology as opposed to our Constitution and to the American people, they're actually less efficient and more prone to corruption and waste, fraud, and abuse. So I think that the American people are the ones that lose out from Schedule F policies, and I think on the question of the Biden-Harris record, we do know that this is an administration that has promulgated a final rule in order to help protect our civil service.
Thank you. So while we're on the topic of loyalists, I'd like to talk about one of the Republican witnesses, Ms. Gunasakura. She is the author of Project 2025's EPA chapter. She was also a top official at the EPA during the Trump administration, and word on the streets is that she might head the agency during a future Trump term. And what is her vision for the EPA? She wants to dismantle it, and so that the EPA goes easy on corporate polluters. She wants to make our air and our water less safe. She wants to place fewer regulations on greenhouse gases, endangering public health and driving climate change. She's also called the threats of climate change, quote, overstated. She laid out all of this in her chapter for Project 25. It's on page 417. Ms. Perryman, what damage can be done if these harmful policies are unleashed at the EPA?
We know that it will make Americans less safe. It will make our world less safe. But we also know, and there was a Scientific American article recently about this that we can submit to the committee, that there are scientists in the United States government today that are dusting off their resumes, that are already concerned about being purged for their loyalty to facts and evidence and to the American people. And so I think this presents more than just a single policy concern, but really a broader overall problem for the American people and for the safety of our world.
So let's be clear. This whole plan is another attempt to buy out our democracy. That's why Big Oil met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago. These corporations want less regulation. They want less government oversight. Dismantling our federal workforce makes that easier. These huge corporations pour money into our elections, and they lavish our Supreme Court justices with gifts, and now they want to buy out our federal agencies. Our federal government has jobs to do and the American people to serve. They cannot do that if they are staffed with partisan hacks. And that, I would argue, is the true incompetence and danger that we are facing, not the incompetence of actually getting things done. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask for unanimous consent to enter the entire Trump Project 2025 into the record so that the American people can have it at their disposal for reference for this hearing.
Very good. I don't think anyone on this side has ever read that, but apparently you all have, so we'll enter it into the record without objection. So ordered.
Thank you so much. And again, I just appreciate the transparency of this particular committee, because last week, right after the debate, we tried to enter it into the record in the House Natural Resources Committee, and 3 members on the GOP side of the aisle actually objected to putting it in the record. And I have to say, we were genuinely shocked, because I've never seen an objection to a UC to put evidence in the record. But it was very clear in that hearing that the GOP was trying to distance themselves from this document. So, you know, I think it's interesting that we're here today, where we've got the authors of the document, and I just want to say welcome to the American people to your campaign stop on the Donald Trump campaign. Here we are in the Oversight Committee, and we've got a bunch of former Trump and current Trump officials. We've got authors of Project 2025, which is the blueprint for the next presidential transition. And the last stop for the Trump campaign was the House floor last night, because Donald Trump asked the House GOP leadership to put a CR on the floor that they knew was not going to pass, that had a voter bill attached to it, and then he told everyone to vote against it.
Mr. Carr, you didn't answer Mr. Raskin's simple question on ABC and revoking the license. I don't need to know whether you make the same decisions with Democrats or Republicans. I just want to know simply, do you think, based on the ABC debate, in your role as a former FCC commissioner, and do you think that that is grounds for revoking the license for ABC?
Thank you. What I've said is consistent with what I've said for the past 6 years, which is every single decision, including in the licensing context, is one that I'll make based on the facts, the record.
So what is
with the First Amendment.
The whole country has the facts. We all saw the debate. I mean, it's not like some complicated question. Based on those facts, based on what David Muir did, based on the questions that were asked, would you recommend that the license be revoked? I mean, President Trump obviously has an opinion on it. He's made it. What's your opinion?
Look, I think I've been pretty clear. Again, I've been nominated by both President Biden and
that's not answering the question. That's not answering the question. I mean,
I've been asked different versions.
You know, I'm not trying to be a debate moderator, but it's a simple. That answer would never fly in a debate. I mean, come on. It's a simple question. Do you agree with President Trump's opinion that? Look, at least I respect that Trump has an opinion. Just give us your opinion, yes or no.
My opinion is that the FCC in every single case has to apply the law consistent with the First Amendment.
And I'm saying, how would you apply it here? If Trump looked at the debate, he said the debate was unfair. He says that one thing that people respect about him, he says what he believes. You're sitting here and not giving us an opinion. Just say, yes, I agree with President Trump, or no, I disagree with it. This is what people, they hate the obfuscation. Just take a stand. How hard is it?
My position is clear. What you're raising are concerns about weaponization. I think that's important that we talk about that. When there's a license transfer of radio stations...
This is a bunch of gobbledygook.
Let the witness answer the question.
I'll give you an actual case. A license transfer in South Florida to a group that people believed were conservative purchasers. Democrats said the FCC should block it because the election depended on it.
But my question is very simple. Based on the debate, and based on what
Democrats in Congress who wrote letters to cable companies telling them they should drop Fox News because of the decisions that the newsroom made.
Based on the debate, did you think that the questions were unfair or rigged in a way that calls for ABC's license to be revoked? The way President Trump has been very clear. I respect, he's very clear on his view. Do you agree or disagree with his view? It's a yes or no.
Gosh, I think my position has been very clear going back to 2017 as a commissioner.
Gentleman's time's expired, but please feel free to answer the question.
2012, I've maintained a very consistent issue. But if your concern is weaponization, we should talk about that. When President Biden stood at the White House podium and said Elon Musk is worth being looked at, and then all of a sudden, the FCC abruptly reverses a 2020 decision to get him $885 million to bring broadband to 640,000 people. I think that's concerning. When Democrats in Congress write letters to cable companies asking them to drop Fox News because of the decisions, I think that's concerning. And so I think you've seen from my record a consistent pattern of always basing my decisions at the FCC based on the law, the facts, and the First Amendment. That's what I've done. That's what I'll always do.
Very good. Chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama.
Mr. Winfrey, Dr. Winfrey, thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. I was really interested to see that you are the author of Chapter 24, Project 2025 on the Federal Reserve. Is that correct?
That's right. There'll be a quiz afterwards.
Well, you know what? So actually, I was reading it while I was sitting here, and there's some really interesting economic theories. So I'm a bit of an economics geek, so I was interested. And one of the sub-chapters in Project 2025, Chapter 24 that you wrote talks about free banking, and it's one of the features. And you alluded to it in your testimony in terms of sort of returning the purse strings back to Congress in terms of the budget process for the federal government. But as I understand this economic theory that you're putting forward around the concept of free banking is to essentially deregulate the money market and interest and to return banking regulation to the banks. Is that correct?
So I don't actually recommend free banking. What I do is I make a series of recommendations for how to rethink monetary policy under the current system where the Federal Reserve controls monetary policy through an independent Fed, which I think is really important.
But is
I
the
then
effect,
go
Mr.
through
Winfrey,
a series of other theoretical
But Mr. Winfrey,
ideas.
hold on just a second. Let me
Well,
just
hold on.
clarify my
I go
question.
through it.
Let me clarify my
Sure.
question. Do you have a subchapter in your chapter that is titled Free Banking?
And what does it say at the end of the chapter, of the subchapter?
Just answer the question, sir.
It says that.
Yes, the answer is yes.
It says that this is a suboptimal way of conducting monetary policy. I also
Ms.
list
Dr.
a series
Winfrey,
of
let's
other.
clarify. So Project 2025 is a presidential transition document, correct? It's the intent of this document as it was drafted was to provide a transition document regarding policies that you would hope the next conservative administration would adopt. Is that correct?
It is a.
That's what it's designed
It's
to
a
be.
book that was published by the Heritage Foundation. And when I wrote that chapter, I was employed by the Heritage Foundation. I am no longer employed by Heritage.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I want to just point out, thank you, that the stated purpose by the Heritage Foundation and the over 100 conservative organizations involved in this document is for it to provide a transition document for the Trump administration. And while I understand that our colleagues have been trying to distance themselves from it, it is the playbook that was put forward by the conservative community for the next administration. And I appreciate your clarifications this morning, but Mr. Chairman, I would like to like to ask for unanimous consent to have Project 2025 admitted into the record for this hearing. It's relevant to Dr. Winfrey's testimony.
All 900 plus pages?
Yes, sir.
All right. Without objection?
All right.
So ordered.
And I really encourage the American people to crack this book open, and you can Google it and find it and read for yourselves. You can read about free banking, about deregulating the banks, about allowing our banking system and economy to be deregulated so that they can do what they want. And we all know what the outcome of that is. We saw the huge crash that happened in 2008 that devastated our economy, wiped out people's wealth, wiped out their savings, wiped out teachers who had their retirement accounts completely destroyed, people who lost their homes, who ended up homeless as a result of it. And so I appreciate that you're bringing these ideas. I'm all for debate on big ideas, but we already have tried, and Donald Trump has tried some of these policies, and they were devastating for the American economy. I just want that to be clear. Now, I want to clear up a couple of other things. Ms. Onwuka, for Economic Opportunity Independent Women's Forum. We had another witness last week from the Independent Women's Forum. It's an organization that's also involved in Project 2025. You guys have a number of contributors, correct?
I can't speak to that, but I do know at least one person who did author a chapter, not me.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. But I do want to clarify that some of the statements that were made this morning about price gouging and especially around the energy sector are just unfactual. The American people know they're being price gouged. Go grocery shopping. We see it. We see it every day. In terms of American energy, the facts do not support what was stated here. We have the highest oil and gas production in American history has happened over the last several years. The reason why gas is expensive at the pump is because these oil and gas companies are jacking up the price at the pump in order to make more money. They have record profits. That is what is going on. It has nothing to do with production. So we need to actually be clear. And then, Mr. DeVore, I appreciate that you're a former House rep. That I appreciate anyone who puts their name on the line, but the statement that was made about immigrants who are undocumented taking American jobs under the legislation that we passed is a statement that Donald Trump made at a rally and is just untrue. So I just want to be clear about that. Secondly, the Inflation Reduction Act is the name that was assigned to a bill that President Biden passed by the United States Senate. That's a name that came from the U.S. Senate. So just wanted to do a little fact checking here this morning. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Winfrey, as you've said to Representative Stansbury and many others, you authored the Federal Reserve chapter of Project 2025. Now, in 2016, you were on President Trump's transition team, correct?
That's right.
And do you have any role in his transition team now?
I do not.
In the Project 2025 Federal Reserve chapter, you recommend that we eliminate the dual mandate for the Fed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you still recommend that if President Trump wins, he do that?
I would recommend that.
And to explain that,
it would actually require action from Congress.
But you would recommend that he pursue that policy. And to explain that, that basically means right now the Fed has a mandate to lower inflation and also to have full employment. You think that what the Fed should do is just focus on lowering inflation. In other words, would you recommend then that Chairman Powell should be raising interest rates until inflation comes to 2%?
I don't have any insight into the data that the Federal Reserve
if you were to eliminate
they're using to make their decision.
If you were to eliminate the dual mandate,
correct.
Do you have a view of what the inflation target should be?
So I think it should be about 2%.
And so wouldn't
as it has been historically.
Wouldn't the natural course be that the Fed would have to raise interest rates until they hit the 2% mandate if that's the policy and if they aren't considering employment?
That's correct, but let's take a step back. The Federal Reserve has a dual mandate. Other large central banks like the European Central Bank and the Bank of England do not. They have a single mandate, price stability.
Sure, but under your proposal,
because it's something they can actually control.
I just want to be clear. What you're saying is a future Trump presidency, if he took your recommendations, would mean higher interest rates. I mean, you would have the Fed under an elimination of the dual mandate, basically raising rates. Meaning, if I could finish, meaning that the stock market is going to go down with the rates being raised, meaning that we're going to have a problem with unemployment if the rates keep going up, because you're basically saying that the Fed has to be singularly focused on 2%. Am I misinterpreting what you're saying?
The Federal Reserve is an independent central bank, right, that has a mandate, a dual mandate from Congress. Congress would have to change that.
But
the president has...
The whole point is you want it changed. You want it changed, and you want Trump to change it. You were on the transition team. You've written a whole paper on it. I don't understand.
Yeah,
it's a defensible position. I mean, I think Milton Friedman, others would want it, but the American people should know the consequences. I mean, what you're advocating is Volcker-like policies, but at a time where we have 2.8% or 2.3% inflation. And what under your proposal, and if Trump comes and listens to you, what that would mean is higher interest rates for the American people until we got to 2% interest, right? Isn't that correct?
And what happened after Volcker was the Fed chair?
I think Volcker did a great job at the time, but that was at 13%. But what you're saying is we got to swallow that medicine today, and you want higher interest rates in a Trump administration. Now, Mr. DeVore, thank you for your service. You know, they say it's statistics, lies, damn lies, and statistics, but I'm going to throw out two of them because you have so many statistics. Do you happen to know the GDP of California compared to Texas?
Well, of course, California is 60% larger, so the GDP is going to be larger than
Do you
Texas,
happen to know the per capita GDP difference?
It's also higher because of the area that you represent, sir, Silicon Valley. Absolutely. Chips are more expensive than oil.
Do you happen to know the real wage differential between California and Texas?
And it's marginally higher in California, although your Gini coefficient is higher than in Texas. So you have greater wage inequality in California than in Texas because we manufacture more than California does.
We could, it's 75,000 to 62,000, but why not just say they're two great states that help contribute to America's economic growth?
That's right. 1 in 4 Americans come from those two great states, sir.
Thank you.
Instead of holding a hearing on gun violence, we've convened a panel of 4 witnesses with deep ties to Project 2025, the MAGA manifesto for a second Trump term, so they can audition for Mr. Trump's approval and land a spot on his cabinet or sub-cabinet, a fate not necessarily to be envied if you talk to former Vice President Mike Pence or Trump's former Defense Secretary Mark Esper or his former National Security Advisor John Bolton or Cassidy Hutchinson or more than 100 other former Republican officials declaring Donald Trump completely unfit for office. But here we are with these Project 2025 luminaries who've taken up the challenge to set forth the agenda on how to take America backwards in every domain of public life. A recently disclosed email from Stephen Bradbury, one of Project 2025's leaders and Trump's former Secretary of Transportation, says that, quote, those who show real commitment and valuable contributions will be recognized by the leaders of the Project 2025, whose recommendations are likely to carry influence with the key personnel decision makers. And today, two of our witnesses, Mr. Carr and Ms. Sakura, showed just that real commitment by authoring chapters of Project 2025. Press reports say Mr. Carr is vying to be Mr. Trump's FCC chairman, while Ms. Sakura apparently has her eye on becoming Mr. Trump's next EPA administrator. And I will stand corrected if you guys disclaim any ambitions for those offices, but that's what the press is reporting. The majority's other two witnesses also come to us from organizations that are right there on the advisory board of Project 2025. So we'll hear from them and we'll discuss how they intend to implement the extremist Project 2025 game plan in a hypothetical second administration for Donald Trump. It's a program that depends on sending in an army of Trump sycophants and loyalists to replace 50,000 professional civil servants. It's a program subordinating the people's government to big corporations, and it tramples the civil rights and liberties of women to abortion, birth control, and IVF, which the Republicans just voted against yesterday. It's a plan to upend democratic government as we know it, and it involves politicizing the federal workforce and gutting the professional civil service, weaponizing the Department of Justice against political rivals and the people, seizing political control of independent agencies like the Federal Reserve Board and the FCC, eliminating overtime pay for millions of workers, denying the climate crisis and pulling the plug on environmental progress, ending reproductive freedom in every state, federally surveilling births and abortions, legalizing discrimination against LGBTQ Americans, organizing mass deportations and detention camps, deploying the military to quash free speech and protests, eliminating Head Start and the Department of Education, dismantling NOAA and privatizing the National Wealth Service, limiting benefits for veterans. Now, Donald Trump has half-heartedly tried to distance himself from this toxic and increasingly unpopular agenda, but you need only to turn to the table of contents of this big book to realize it is the total product of Trump's inner circle. The MAGA manifesto has 37 authors and contributors. Of those, 31 served in Trump's administration, 80%. Donald Trump has turned dodgy about his connection to Project 2025, despite the fact that he has praised it and commended its authors, because he knows it is way too extreme for the vast majority of the American people. The Biden-Harris administration has restored America's place as a global leader and led an economic recovery that is the envy of the rest of the world. Project 2025 wants to reverse all the progress we've made, strip Americans of basic fundamental rights and freedoms that we've had for decades, and create a federal workforce loyal only to Donald Trump and not to the Constitution of the United States. Today, Mr. Chairman, we're going to try to get to the details from these Project 2025 experts that you have kindly assembled for us. Let's get specific today, and let's see if the American people really want to follow the dark vision for America that Project 2025 has set forth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you so much. You know what, this hearing is actually the best example of what waste, fraud, and abuse looks like, because the only reason we're having this hearing is because somebody got their feelings hurt in a debate, and I don't understand why we're wasting taxpayer dollars. Next time, tell your big boy to show up and be ready to handle the woman in the room who hopefully will become the next president of the United States. Nevertheless, while we do have two amazing authors from Project 2025, which it seems like everybody got the memo, like, yes, I'm going to double down and say it's my thing, but I'm going to make sure I also say that it ain't our homeboys thing, because we know that it doesn't poll very well with the American people, because the American people are woke enough to recognize that there is nothing good in it for them. I also want to talk about inflation really quickly with you, Ms. Perryman, because we've talked about it a lot. I'm just curious to know, is the inflation that we just struggled through, was that global or was that limited to the United States?
Global.
Global. Seemingly, it was attached to this thing called the global pandemic. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't just the United States.
No.
Okay, so it wasn't just a matter of the Biden-Harris administration and the United States is struggling, right?
I think the United States actually fared better than the rest of the world.
Oh, yeah. In fact, we are, correct?
I think so, yes.
All right, but inflation still hurts, and so that's why we have a candidate that has an actual plan instead of concepts of a plan. Or as I like to say, Trump only has offered concepts of constitutionality mixed with coordinations of a coup. But nevertheless, we're going to move on. I want to talk about the internet really quickly because we wanted to talk about the internet. Actually, let me talk about the border real fast, and then we can talk about Texas in this way. I'd ask for unanimous consent to admit this article from The Hill that says Trump says, blame it on me if border bill fails.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much. Now I'm going to move on to the internet, and I'm actually going to talk about Texas because I believe that the testimony has been somewhere around the fact that no money has actually been disputed as it relates to rural broadband. I'd also ask for unanimous consent to admit this article from the USDA.gov. USDA officials attend groundbreaking to expand high-speed internet access in rural Texas, dated March 7th, 2024, Italy, Texas.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you so much.
With respect, that was not the testimony.
Oh, I thought you said no dollars had been spent.
The largest single program.
My question is, did you not say
$42 billion.
Okay.
0 houses have been connected. There are other federal programs, including Trump-era ones, that right now are turning dirt and connecting.
Okay, so just to be clear, because I don't want the American people to be confused, because I was confused, because it almost seemed as if, considering the fact the name of this hearing is the failed policies, as if nothing had been done. But to clarify for those that are watching, you aren't saying that no dollars have been spent as it relates to rural broadband dollars under the Infrastructure Act, correct?
To be clear, for the signature effort, $42
yes
billion.
Or no? Have any dollars been spent?
Not a
$1.
single person has been connected. There's
that's not my question, though. My question was, have any
issues? Senator Ted Cruz from
okay,
Texas
I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on.
that
I'm reclaiming my time at this point.
Many of these bills,
I'm reclaiming my time, which means, Chairman, I'm going to
per location.
Stop my time because the witness is not.
Are you asking him a question, or are you?
No, I'm not asking him a question. I reclaim my time.
All right. The chair recognizes Ms. Crockett.
Okay, now I was at 41, y'all, so go back up.
We'll give you 9 more seconds.
Okay, thank you so much. Here's the deal. You've testified a lot about the problem with the broadband rollout being diversity, equity, and inclusion. You said DEI, I don't know how many times, which is one of the issues that Project 2025 takes issue with. But it's interesting to me because I have another article from the Texas Tribune, and it actually specifically states that internet providers say they are simultaneously hopeful and skeptical about whether the incoming federal dollars will be enough to connect the most underserved Texans. Historically, other federal rural broadband funding programs have seen limited success because many companies who committed to providing broadband went into default after radically underestimating their cost. It doesn't say anything about diversity. And the final thing that I will say is that this election, I didn't ask you a question. The final thing that I will say is that this election is the best example of why y'all are so afraid of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because then you can't have a simple-minded, underqualified white man somehow end up ascending. Instead, you've got to pay attention to the qualified black woman that is on the other side. And with that, I will yield.
You know, this would all be funny if it wasn't so devastating. At a time when the leader of the Republican Party is trying to claim that he has no connection whatsoever to Project 2025, an outright lie, another lie like the one that he spews daily about Haitian Americans in Springfield, Ohio. Again, the leader of the Republican Party is trying to claim that he has no connection whatsoever to Project 2025, an outright lie. Our Republican colleagues have invited 4 of the manifesto's architects to testify today. I'm over here. In a desperate attempt to erase all of the ways that the American public has benefited from the Biden-Harris administration, this committee has instead spotlighted what Project 2025 would offer: chaos and corruption. However, we would be ignoring a critical component of Project 2025 if we did not address the fact that its creators have been secretly peddling a, quote, 100-day playbook, unquote, that contains executive orders and emergency actions to roll out in the first hours of a second Trump presidency. Instead of sharing this plan with the public, an indictment of your dangerous policy plans in and of itself, those behind Project 2025 claim it is too controversial to release. Ms. Guna Sakara, yes or no? As a main author of Project 2025, are you aware of this playbook or quote-unquote fourth pillar? And remember, you are under oath.
Yeah, and it's online on the website.
Can you please detail what exactly it calls for?
I think you explained it pretty well. It is a plan of action so that when Republicans and conservatives have another chance at a next administration, there's not lost time, and so that there is a plan ready to go.
I don't know if that was specific enough. You are under oath. Can you please detail what exactly it calls for, this fourth pillar, this 180-day playbook? Please detail what it calls for.
Again, I'd reiterate what I just said, that I think you summarized it quite well. It includes a plan of action on day one so that
you didn't
Republicans...
say anything, and that's the problem. What is the plan of action?
It's to institute a more conservative vision on things that the American people want because they're experiencing all of these hardships caused by the chaos and corruption of the Biden-Harris administration.
Reclaiming my time. I find it hard to believe that you don't know details of the 100-day playbook, but there's one person that definitely knows, Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, and that is why as co-founder of the Stop Project 2025 Task Force, alongside Representative Jared Huffman and dozens of our colleagues, we sent a letter to Mr. Roberts requesting he testify before Congress and release this 180-day playbook. We sent this letter on August 8th. The next day, he delayed his book launch, went into hiding. Kevin Roberts, what are you so afraid of? I am disappointed but unsurprised that the authors and leaders of Project 2025 are hiding their 180-day playbook. So today, Congressman Huffman and I are announcing a new, fully confidential tip line. Any person can visit huffman.house.gov/tip-line-form to submit any information you have about the secret playbook behind Project 2025. That goes for conservatives with a change of heart, workers at the Heritage Foundation, and our witnesses here today, who will perhaps find more courage when the cameras are off. I yield.
Good morning. Mr. Kerkorian, you're an advisory board member for Project 2025, correct? Yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Kerkorian, in addition to being a Project 2025 board member, you also run the Center for Immigration Studies. You've done that for decades, where you spread and disseminated writings of people like Kevin McDonald, John Friend, and Jared Taylor, correct?
We used to have an email service that distributed links to
those
op-ed.
to their writings. That's right.
And the New York Times and all kinds of other.
Correct. And you, so yes, I know that you're aware that you spread the writings of these three along with others, but these three are egregious examples. McDonald is the editor of a white nationalist journal. Your organization, as you said, disseminated his writings. He blamed Jewish people for the deaths of millions of people in the 20th century. John Friend, who you just said you disseminated his writings, is an infamous Holocaust denier. You spread his writings. Jared Taylor stated, quote, and I quote, this horrible quote, that when black people are left on their own, civilization disappears, end quote. That's what he said. You, a Project 2025,
we distributed only.
You only distributed. Correct. I understand. I'm reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. Correct. You only disseminated writings from multiple white nationalists. Reclaiming my time. I'm going to ask you a question, sir. I'm going to ask you the next question.
Wrote about immigration.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. I'd like that time back. So you, a Project 2025 board member, you're stating you did not disseminate, for example, Mr. Taylor, Mr. McDonald, or Mr. Friend's specific quotes here, but you just continuously disseminated these white nationalists' writing. One time is a problem. When you do it over and over and over again, it's a pattern. Now, with my time remaining, which I believe should be added, Mr. Chairman, because I was interrupted and I reclaimed that time, I have questions for Ms. Gunasekara. You served as chief of staff at the EPA in the Trump administration, correct?
Yes.
And you've worked with Trump and his administration to implement your ideas in the past, correct?
Yes.
You authored Chapter 13 of Project 2025, correct?
Yes.
So you would support the ideas in Chapter 13 being implemented by the government?
I believe they are very good ideas for the next EPA.
Yes, you would support those?
Yeah.
So if Trump was president and he reached out to you and said he wanted to implement your chapter of Project 2025, would you support him in implementing that chapter? Would you say yes?
Time's expired, but you can answer that. I gave you 15 seconds.
Yeah, I don't.
No, they interrupted me for.
Well, I'm the chairman of the committee. I decide. I gave you 15
I'd
seconds.
like to appeal that ruling,
Well,
Mr. Chairman.
look, you got your time. Answer with the witness. Feel free to answer the question, and then I'm going to recognize Mr. Fry.
Yeah, I don't believe he would call me and ask to do that.
Right, but if he did, you would want him to implement. You do want him to implement you.
Again, I don't believe that he would call and ask me to do that.
I understand. Do you
right.
want it? Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to appeal the ruling. I'd like to appeal the ruling, Madam Chair.
No. Chair now recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Isn't it within the rules for me to appeal the ruling of the chair and ask for a vote?
It's not an appealable rule. I gave you extra time. The ranking member went a minute over. I gave the ranking member 6.5 minutes. He took 7.5 minutes.
I was interrupted.
So I think you guys are doing okay, Mr. Chairman. All right, we'll let it rest with that, and you'll see what happens in the next Congress, because we're going to be fastidious about the rules in the next Congress. We're going to show you how to do it.
So that's good. That's good. All right. Chair now recognizes, because the committee's about waste, fraud, abuse, and mismanagement. This is a hearing about
and
policy.
You exemplify it well, Mr. Chairman.
No,
I concede that.
So this is a hearing about substantive policy. If you want to defend the policies of the current administration, if you want to talk about Kamala Harris's agenda, her policy positions, please do so, because we're not very clear what they are. Chair now recognizes Mr. Fry from South Carolina.
Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. You know, although the subject matter of today's hearing is to be expected, certainly makes it no less offensive or frightening. My Republican colleagues very often like to quote Dr. King, I don't know, maybe for some faux civil rights credibility or to pervert his words to suit your extremist needs, while working actively to undermine his legislative legacy. On the first page of Chapter 18, Project 2025 complains about how the Biden administration has been fighting for racial equity. On the next page, it calls for eliminating data collection on race and ethnicity in employment. On the page after that, it calls for rescinding an executive order signed in 1965 that prohibits discrimination in hiring by contractors. Mr. Berry, do these terrible ideas sound familiar?
They're great ideas.
These terrible ideas sound familiar? Of course they do. You came up with them. Mr. Berry, I find it shameful to advance a vision attacking the very policies and agencies that have helped Black Americans secure jobs, earn a living, and provide for our families. This Project 2025 plan is policy violence, plain and simple. Its authors have placed such a large target on the EOC because of the incredible work the EOC is doing today. Last year alone, the agency filed more than 27,000 charges of race-based discrimination. These workers and their families have a pathway to justice, accountability, and healing because of the policies and regulations that Project 2025 is trying to get rid of. Ms. Wiley, how would workers be harmed by Project 2025's commitment to undermining crucial protections that are enforced by EOC and other federal agencies?
Well, essentially, it guts the ability to both be able to have the rights and have enforcement and protection of the rights that we already have, and we've been seeing improvements and advancements when we have been enforcing them. And I'm also deeply concerned with any suggestion that we should not be collecting data or that labor rights, the rights to organize, which has been so important for workers across race, including white men, to ensure that they're getting fair wages and safe working conditions. All of these are actually in that chapter, and they threaten our workplaces for people who are white, for people of color, for people of all backgrounds in this country. And I think that's why we all need to be concerned, because it really is about all of us.
That's right. They threaten our workplaces for every person who calls this country home. EOC offers essential protections that create workplaces where all of us can thrive, but Project 2025 aspires to be the realization of a decades-long crusade by Republicans to strip away this key pillar of the Civil Rights Act. As a founding member of the Stop Project 2025 Task Force, I look forward to showing and telling the American people exactly who you are, Mr. Berry, along with your extremist friends. I urge my colleagues to join me in building the inclusive world we know to be possible, one in which everyone, is there something funny?
No.
I didn't think so. Nothing funny about this. And in honor of my departed mother and for my 15-year-old daughter, I will do everything possible to stop you from building the world that you were hell-bent on doing. I urge my colleagues to join me in building the inclusive world we know to be possible, one in which everyone can show up to work free from discrimination. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Administrator, for being here. I appreciate your service. You're obviously helping to implement the biggest climate bill in history, which we passed under President Biden. My district includes the Port of Long Beach. I'm the former mayor of Long Beach. We know that the port itself, you were just in the Port of Los Angeles, I think, our neighbor, a huge economic engine for the country. We're fighting to electrify the Port of Long Beach right now under the $3 billion EPA Clean Port program. I wrote to you last week. You responded. We're very grateful to your response and the team, and so we're excited about that opportunity. But I want to turn also on this issue, broader issue of environmental justice. I want to just quickly highlight a case where polluters are getting a pass and residents in my community, the northern part of my district, are feeling the impact. In Vernon, California, small city in southeast Los Angeles, Exide Technologies spent decades recycling batteries and dumping lead and toxins into the air. This includes soil and water, which has now seeped through. Now, the company poisoned surrounding communities in southeast LA, where people suffer from cancer, asthma, learning disabilities, and dangerous levels of lead in their blood. Now, the Obama administration forced Exide to make commitments to fix and fund the cleanup. But in 2020, Trump's EPA and Department of Justice abandoned those responsibilities and approved a bankruptcy plan that let Exide essentially walk away from the cleanup. This is not acceptable to me and certainly not to the communities that I represent. Now, Administrator, one of my first acts when I came to Congress was to lead the call for a federal Superfund designation, along with Senator Padilla. This will secure, of course, federal funds to clean the site that is desperately needed to provide this community true justice. I've been glad that this process has moved forward, and in fact, just recently, we passed a major milestone. Last week, the EPA site inspection report showed the site is eligible for a Superfund listing based on the levels of groundwater contamination. So I want to thank your team for partnering with us there, and I just want to formally ask you to once again just continue to commit to really push for this issue as we move forward to that Superfund designation.
Absolutely. You have my commitment on that.
Donald Trump met with big oil executives to promise to carry out their policy agenda in exchange for $1 billion in campaign contributions, which oversight Democrats are actually investigating. And if that wasn't enough, he promised he would pay back his big oil donors with tax cuts for the rich. And as we know, worst of all, his agenda will be enabled by an extremist Supreme Court that Donald Trump himself appointed. Now, Administrator, I know you can't address a candidate's policy platform. I know that's not why you're here. So instead, I want you to just please explain how important it is that the agency continues to implement the Inflation Reduction Act and the climate gains that we've already achieved.
Well, listen, I'll say this. One program in the Inflation Reduction Act is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That Congress allotted us $27 billion. We designed a program in consultation with the financial sector, every aspect of the financial sector. We believe that we can pull hundreds of billions of dollars off the sidelines to make homes more energy efficient, to build manufacturing capacity in this country, to create jobs. It's important for me to say that these are not just happening in blue states. They're happening in red states. They're happening in Alabama and Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. And so this really does prove that clean energy has a role in the new economy and is creating hundreds of thousands of jobs all across this country. But more important, it's making us secure because we're bringing the manufacturing back domestically. Rolling back these types of provisions, eliminating career scientists at EPA, it's just going to ruin the economy and it's going to ruin the progress that we're making.
I yield back.
Project 2025 threatens to completely overturn abortion rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, civil liberties, free speech, and environmental protections for everyday Americans who deserve the right to clean air and clean water and to not be poisoned by the projects that are happening around them. It's no surprise that Project 2025 attacks the National Environmental Policy Act, one of our bedrock environmental laws intended to protect communities from harm and give them voice in federal decision-making. If there's a project that is going to potentially be installed next to your home that could spill cancerous chemicals and expose your kids to substances that could delay their mental and cognitive development, you would want to know. If there is a project or a fracking site that gets put in, and when you wake up in the morning, your lungs burn because there's something in the air that you can't see, you would want to know. And you would want the right to intervene and have a say in what gets put where. Mr. Beard, are you familiar with Project 2025 and its intersections with NEPA?
Yes, I am.
And just so we're clear, again, because the document was not allowed to be submitted, I will read page 60 from Project 2025. Quote, the president should instruct the Council on Environmental Quality to rewrite its regulations implementing NEPA along the lines of the 2020 effort and restoring its key provisions, such as banning the use of cumulative impact analysis. Banning the use of analyzing the cumulative impact of a given project. Mr. Beard, what exactly is cumulative impact analysis? And can you briefly tell us about the Trump-era 2020 regulations that they are referring to here?
Yes, that in which you're speaking of in particular addresses with Project 2025, the cumulative and environmental justice impacts as well as the environmental justice impacts to communities like mine, communities across the country. It's important because as the climate changes and gets worse, those people are made to suffer and get the worst of the damage. With environmental justice impact, it talks about the access to being able to speak to the situations you mentioned that would affect you if something of that nature moved next door to you. But it also looks at the cumulative impacts because over time, those impacts worsen. We know the releases, we know what they're doing beforehand, but it takes time for that to materialize. And if it goes beyond 120 days, then we're stuck. So we have a problem with that. And we have to consider climate, environmental justice, and the cumulative impacts of these projects.
Thank you very much. You know, I think when we look at the broad impact of what's happening here, what we are also looking at is, especially in terms of Project 2025, is handing over all of the tools of our democracy and governance that is supposed to be wielded by the people and the public, for the people and the public, and handing those keys over directly to industry, to rewrite them however they see fit to maximize their own pocket, to line their own pockets at the expense of the health and dignity of the American people. Profit should not drive absolutely everything. And governance is where we are here to assert the rights and protections of people when a profit incentive or a profit motive then comes at odds with people's human rights. It may be profitable to poison a community, but that's not what we're here to do. There has to be lines. And you know, again, I am disappointed, and I would like to seek unanimous consent once again to submit Project 2025 under my personal request.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it is always an interesting adventure here in Congress, and especially this morning in this unexpectedly spicy hearing. You know, as a water resources professional, I spent my entire career working to make sure our communities have access to clean water and a sustainable future. So I was expecting to come into this hearing this morning to talk about NEPA, to talk about the importance of making sure that our communities have a seat at the table as we're developing infrastructure and decisions are being made on their behalf and with their consent. And And, you know, I heard some conversation this morning about the need, obviously, for expediting infrastructure. We all support building infrastructure for our communities. That is why we passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill in the fall of 2021. But unfortunately, it was bipartisan, but many of the people in this room did not vote for it. But I spend a lot of my time when I'm back home in New Mexico working across the aisle with my community partners to get that infrastructure built. It's water pipelines, it's broadband, and that was made possible because of the visionary leadership in the Congress that happened before this and by President Biden and Kamala Harris. Let's talk about NEPA for a moment. NEPA was put into place in the late 1960s. It passed and then was signed by President Nixon. It was signed and passed on a bipartisan basis. Now, I just heard a comment about how Democrats have broken trust over the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Okay, y'all, we're about to take a vote on a CR today that breaks trust on the Fiscal Responsibility Act. It actually violates the handshake deal that was made with the president over your desire to tank the economy, to shrink the budget, to take away resources, and through which you shoved through a NEPA bill that tried to gut environmental regulations. So if you want to talk about breaking trust, let's talk about that, because you're about to take a vote on a bill. And if you don't want to break trust, how about you vote for a CR to keep the government operational? But NEPA was put there as public trust to support our communities, because as Mr. Beard has pointed out in his testimony, our communities were systematically excluded across the country in opportunities for economic advancement, for meaningful jobs, and were often used in siting and putting infrastructure that not only did not benefit them, but directly harmed them. And that is why the Biden administration, and that is why the soon-to-be Harris administration includes consideration of cumulative impacts, because our communities deserve a chance to have a seat at the table. They deserve the opportunity to have economic development, and they deserve to have the opportunity to build a future that they believe in. And that's what this administration's about. It's about what the Democratic leadership of this Congress is trying to advance. It's what those of us on this side of the aisle are trying to do to help our communities. And I'm frankly just shocked by some of the rhetoric I hear around this dais today. You had a bite at the apple. You tried to tank our economy over it. You got what you wanted, and now you're back here asking for more? Well, our communities' lives are on the line. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and to clarify the record, Ms. Stansberry, I'm not sure if you were here when the Project 2025 report was accepted to the record. I think the objection was to something called the Trump Project 2025 report, which if you or Mr. Huffman or anybody else can produce that report, a legitimate report that's not been photoshopped, then we would probably more than likely unanimously accept that to the record too.
Mr. Chairman, I respect that, and I have deep respect for you as well, but I think you can replay the tape, and that is not what was objected to, so thank you.
We could argue about that, but we will move on.
And for the record, Mr. Chairman, I've had Democrats object to my UC request last Congress when they were in charge. Yield back.
Mr. Shapiro, thank you for joining us today. I think it is important that you're here as one of the leading conservative voices in the country. And the country has, in the last couple weeks, talked a lot about and Googled Project 2025. It's one of the most Googled search terms right now. And you're not going to get any censorship from me. So I just wanted to know, from your perspective, I think it would help us understand on just like a scale of 0 to 100%, how much do you support Project 2025?
I think, like President Trump, I haven't looked all that deeply at Project 2025, but it seems that Democrats on this committee, sort of like Peter Pan and Tinkerbell, if they say Project 2025 enough, their presidential candidate becomes alive again.
And so, well, let's just talk about pieces of it, and I guess you can tell me if you support it. You probably want less bureaucracy, right?
I do.
I want less bureaucracy. You want more efficiency?
I do.
I want more efficiency. You want taxpayer money spent wisely?
I do. Congrats on becoming a Republican.
Yeah. My parents would be proud. Mass deportations, it calls for that. Do you support that part?
I support the deportation of any illegal immigrant who is in the United States who is not of benefit to the generalized American public.
So if they're picking agriculture that puts food on the tables of everyday Americans, they've never committed a crime inside the United States, they didn't come across with documents, should they be deported?
If they have not paid taxes and if their draw on the taxpayer benefits are larger than the contribution they are making to the economy, or if they're involved in criminal activity, they should be deported.
How do we measure that?
The same way that the IRS measures my income every year. It seems like if the IRS can track down every aspect of every receipt that I've ever submitted, and they can do so for hundreds of millions of other Americans, they can do that for illegal immigrants as well, except for the fact that no one knows how many are in the country thanks to this administration.
So you would be cool with creating a system where they could pay those taxes if they wanted to and then stay and work and put food on our table?
It depends on how long it would take for them to pay the taxes, and they would also have to go presumably to the back of the line, although I'm not sure why I'm testifying about immigration policy at this point.
How about banning the abortion pill? That's part of Project 2025. Do you support that part?
I think that that's a state-by-state issue on a personal level. I'm
just asking you.
Sure, I'm a fully pro-life person, which means that I'm not in favor of the distribution of the abortion pill.
Banning same-sex marriage, what about that part?
I am in favor of traditional marriage between a man and a woman, and I'm perfectly fine with anyone having any sort of voluntary sexual arrangement they seek. That's a different thing from whether the government should attach benefits to that personal relationship.
But you think it's a sin to have same-sex marriage?
I mean, I'm confused. Are you asking me as a religious Jew what I think about biblically?
I'm just asking, is it a sin to be gay?
Is it a sin to be gay? I mean, how long do we have here? 2 minutes? I mean, if the basic idea is that sexual orientation is up for government regulation, I'm not in favor of the government regulating the private consenting sexual activity of adults. That is a different thing, once again, from whether the government ought to engage in actual benefits for particular sexual arrangements that adults make.
But again, just you to me, is it a sin or not?
From a religious Jewish perspective, orientation is not a sin, but activity is. That's also the same perspective of most major religions, so far as I'm aware.
Okay. And how about cutting Social Security? Do you support that part of 2025?
I'm not sure what Project 2025's position on Social Security is. I'm in favor of the restructuring of Social Security along the lines of privatization and lowering and increasing the retirement age, because you, as well as every other congressperson, knows Social Security is going to go bankrupt, and yet everyone seems to have an interest in lying about it for the next decade and a half until we have to take austerity measures or radically increase inflation or taxes.
And bans against books about slavery. Do you support that part about?
Why would I possibly be in favor of bans about books about slavery? That would be absolutely ridiculous. What I am in favor of is the idea that school libraries should be able to make decisions along the lines of what exactly is appropriate for, say, a 7th grader and whether they ought to be treated to cartoons and genderqueer. That's not quite the same thing.
And just because we found some receipts, you did say, I think homosexual activity is a sin.
Yes, I'm a religious Jew,
sure
that's true.
There's a genetic component.
You found me out.
Orientation. But the view of all religious people I know has always been that sexual behavior is something that is up to you. And you said, I may have a desire to sleep with many women, but I do not.
I agree with me. Yes, that's true.
Congratulations on your, I'm sure it's very hard to restrain yourself. Mr. Chairman, I just want to shift to Alvin Bragg. He was supposed to be here this week, and he's not coming. And Hunter Biden was supposed to testify. Now he's not testifying. We were supposed to have votes on articles of impeachment, and we didn't. And again, we're just wondering, you guys write great press releases, but the payoff seems to never come. And so I guess we will keep waiting, and we'll do hearings like this. And finally, Chairman, you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater, and that's a restriction on speech, as you have recognized before. But you can yell theater in a crowded fire, and you all can continue to do that all you want, and we'll just waste the American people's time.
The gentleman's time has expired, and I remind him of the first rule of holes. When you're in one, stop digging.
Just to be clear, you would repeal any regulations that prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics.
The position is that Bostock should be read properly, narrowly, and not extended to the biological areas like bathrooms that we've been discussing today.
But that's not what the report says. The report says basically you don't want any regulations that prevent discrimination against gay people and people based on sexual orientation or gender identity. I mean, that's what you call for in the report.
No, the chapter accepts Bostock according to its terms, but resists its extension to areas where it doesn't apply.
I think, I mean, I'm just quoting directly. It says rescind regulations prohibiting discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. I mean, do you stand by that statement?
I stand by what it says in the chapter, yes.
So just to be clear, I mean, that basically means you don't believe that we need to have laws to protect people from discrimination. If someone is gay or someone is transgender, you think that there should not be laws to protect them. Let me go on to one other issue in this report. You say that we need to be scheduling civil employees as F-scheduled employees, which means that the president would have the authority to fire about 50,000 civilian employees if she or he wants to. Is that correct?
Someone else said responsibility. I do support that as a policy matter, that ultimately the president and people accountable to the president should be the ones setting our executive branch policy.
So, I mean, under this scenario, if for example, if President Trump returns to office, he would be able to fire about 50,000 people who are currently civil servants and bring in people who are more consistent with his ideology, and you're recommending this as a policy, correct?
Having more political accountability is a very good thing.
I just want to know, I'm not trying to argue with you, I'm saying for a fact, so you support the idea that Donald Trump could come in, hypothetically, if he wins the election, fire 50,000 civil employees and replace them with people who support his ideology?
I support the Schedule F idea, yes.
And that means that if he wants to take civil servants from the Justice Department, State Department, and from the Department of Homeland Security, and he says they aren't sufficiently for MAGA, I want to fire these folks, 50,000 of them, and replace them with people more aligned with MAGA, he would have the ability to do that. Currently, there are only 4,000 political appointees. You want him to have the authority, if he wins the election, to have 50,000 people replaced, correct?
It's a lesser civil service regime. It's not the same as political appointees, but political policy responsiveness is appropriate when it comes to any employee who touches on public policy, which the Schedule F class would.
I'm directionally correct. I mean, I think the American people should decide whether they want that or not. You're basically saying he should have the ability to fire up to 50,000 people if they're not doing what his ideology is, and replace them with people more consistent with his ideology, and reclassify these folks as Schedule F, correct?
100%.
Thank you.
First off, on Project 2025, this is the work of a think tank. Now, here's a news flash for everyone. There are think tanks in Washington, D.C. There are a lot of them. There are right-leaning think tanks. There are left-leaning think tanks. In fact, one of the more frightening left-leaning think tanks is Center for American Progress. And the head of the Center for American Progress is now ensconced in the White House as a domestic policy advisor to the Biden administration. So don't pretend that you don't have your think tanks on the left, just as think tanks on the right exist, and their purpose is to provide information to legislators, House members, and senators, and sometimes to inform legislation.
The gentleman raised the issue of Project 2025 as somehow it's the product of some distant think tank. I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a list of all the former Trump administration officials who are architects of this atrocious document. I would also like to point out for the record that the key witness in the House Administration Committee on this horrific voter suppression bill is one of the co-architects of Project 2025. And the gentleman, tried to, to take a swipe at the Center for American Progress. I think they actually have good ideas. But the Center for American Progress doesn't want to install Joe Biden as a dictator, unlike what Project 2025 wants to do with regard to Trump. And Madam Speaker, we know that there's a lot that we can do when you have competent leadership in control. Look at the last Congress when the Democrats were in charge. We invested to rebuild our neglected infrastructure, airports, roads, bridges, and ports in your communities. Many of my Republican friends voted against it, but they take bows and issue press releases when they get the money and a project is happening in their district. We brought manufacturing back to the United States, passing the CHIPS and Science Act to drive innovation and create good-paying jobs. We made the largest investment in climate, protecting our water and our air. We strengthened our supply chains and set up new programs to support minority businesses. We ensured that our veterans get health care and that they earn during their service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I rise today in opposition to the rule and in strong support of the Women's Health Protection Act. The Women's Health Protection Act would protect the right to abortion nationwide. It would restore the intensely personal freedom for pregnant people to make decisions about their own bodies. That is the complete opposite of Trump's Project 2025, extremist Republicans' agenda for their policies that they want to advance. Trump's Project 2025 outlines a whole-of-government approach to eliminate the right to abortion. It restricts access to contraception. It calls for the federal government to stop enforcing laws that require hospitals to provide emergency care to pregnant people in need of an abortion. And let me just be clear, Mr. Speaker, this fight is about our fundamental freedoms. The freedom to make choices about our own bodies, our own health, our own economic future. And I'm standing here as one of the 1 in 4 women in America who has had an abortion myself. I can tell you that these decisions are intensely personal. We do not need an extreme Republican Party trying to control our freedoms. In my case, I had already experienced a very difficult pregnancy, and my daughter was born prematurely at 26.5 weeks. She was actually just 1 pound, 14 ounces. She was about the size of my hand. She weighed about the same as a small squash, and she literally almost did not survive. And my doctors told me that if I were to have another pregnancy, it would be extremely high risk, both for me and for the child. And so I took my daily contraceptive pill that Republicans are trying to get rid of for Americans across this country so that I could protect my health and the health of any future pregnancies. And in fact, what happened was I got pregnant anyway, and my doctor said, you really should have an abortion. I made that decision with my doctor, with my family. Why should anyone else be a part of that decision? And it was a hard one for me, but for every person, it should be their choice. Donald Trump has bragged that he did a, quote, great job getting rid of Roe v. Wade. Well, thanks, Donald Trump. Thanks to Donald Trump, 1 in 3 women in this country of childbearing age now live in a state with an abortion ban. Thanks to Republicans, a woman who was 20 weeks pregnant when her water broke was told by doctors that the pregnancy was not viable, but still she was not provided the fundamental freedom to do what she needed to do for her health. She was forced to go through the pain of delivering a stillborn child. Democrats have a completely different vision, and it is in the Women's Health Protection Act. That is to defend and protect your fundamental freedoms. Vote no on this motion. I yield back.
For those concerned about Project 2025, people should know that Project 2025 is Florida 2024. Ms. Perryman, there are policies and lawsuits that have been popping up all over my state and across the South. Book bans, abortion bans, voter suppression that are now in the Project 2025 plan for the entire country. The architects of this plan want us to believe that this is some sort of organic grassroots movement, but you and I know that this is really a small group of people. What is so dangerous about this trend for people in every state across America?
Well, Project 2025 would take away rights of the American people and beneficial programs that we have come to rely on in communities across the country. And so I think that, you know, it really presents a profound threat to individual Americans. We've heard a lot about today about the plight of the middle class and the plight of workers in this country, and we know that it is hard for people to make ends meet. But Project 2025 would seek to undermine things that the Biden-Harris administration have done, for instance, to qualify millions of American workers for overtime pay, and it would reduce a lot of programs that working families rely on.
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 people in the state of Florida are responsible for about 50% of the book bans across the entire state. That doesn't sound like an organic grassroots movement to me. Ms. Perryman, of the policies these extremists are testing in Florida, which one do you see Which ones do you see these same groups laying the groundwork for at the national level, and how are they doing this?
Well, certainly attacks on the freedom to read, attacks on public education, attacks on just very basic ideas and history we see in Florida. We've also seen, of course, the governor of Florida seek to establish a state military and to try to deploy those individuals for his purposes, and we see a variety of those themes in Project 2025.
And we see it happening right now with Amendment 4.
Absolutely.
I don't have much time left, but I just want to say Trump is trying to make it out like he doesn't know anything about Project 2025, but I do not buy it for 1 second. Not when this committee that functions as an arm of the Trump campaign invites Project 2025 authors to be their credible witnesses to attack the Biden-Harris administration. I yield back.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to say welcome and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. I respect it takes a lot to put yourself out there to come and testify in front of Congress, and I know that some of this ground has been covered before, and I really do appreciate the transparency that all of you have brought about your backgrounds, about your positions, and about your perspectives on the policy issues. But just to kind of put it all in one place, I want to quickly go through, and I'm going to mostly state it. I'll ask some questions as we go. Mr. Carr, I know you've said this has been asked and answered several times, but just, going back, we know you're currently serving in the FTC. You've been serving there since 2017, since Donald Trump appointed you, and you are the author of the FCC chapter of 2025, Project 2025, correct? It's just a yes or no.
Well, so just to be clear,
yes, you are. Thank you. I appreciate it. Mr. Krikorian.
Chapter that you reference was done in my personal capacity after getting
the answer is a yes. Yes, Mr.
clearance
Krikorian,
from the Council. I just want to clarify that wasn't in my official
Mr.
capacity.
Krikorian, you serve as the ED of the Center for Immigrant Studies. You are also on the advisory board of Project 2025. Your organization has been actually designated as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. Dr. Hobbs, thank you for your service to this country. I understand you're a veteran and an academic. I do very much respect your background and your work. You're involved in the Independent Women's Forum, which is also involved in Project 2025. You've had a number of authors and contributors from the Women's Forum that are participants in Project 2025. And Ms. Gunasekara, I know we've already covered this, but you're a former chief of staff for the Trump administration at the EPA, and I think you've been very clear about your role in drafting the EPA section of Project 2025. So I think it's very clear this hearing is actually about Project 2025. We've seen over the last almost 2 years how leadership has used this committee essentially as a campaign resource. They tried to impeach Joe Biden, they tried to impugn his family, and now here we are, and we are just 48 days, 47 days until the election, and now they're trying to attack Kamala Harris and use the resources of this committee and to platform future Trump administration officials and their agenda and to try to normalize what are frankly very extreme policies. And we heard from one of the witnesses today that in fact, not only do they support dismantling our federal government, but would support doing even more damage than was done during the Trump administration and even what is recommended inside of this book. So, it's an interesting adventure here always. But I do want to take the remainder of my time to talk about, since there have been some unfounded and unfactual attacks on the current administration, to say that this administration has been one of the single most important administrations in American history in rebuilding our nation's infrastructure, in tackling the climate crisis, in defending our rights, in making sure that our country can function after a historic pandemic. And I think we all look forward to the continued leadership under the next administration in that way. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Man, I love our chairman. I mean, people have called the chairman many things, different adjectives over the last 2 years, but I admire his courage. I mean, literally, as Donald Trump is running away from Project 2025, trying to put as much distance between him and Project 2025 because the American people know it's toxic, but not our chairman. No. Chairman, with all of his wisdom, he features Project 2025 in the hearing, one of our last hearings, right before the election. I mean, if the Trump campaign is listening, here you go. Project 2025 in a hearing. I'm sure they're real happy about that. But, you know, Project 2025 wants to get rid of NOAA, wants to get rid of the National Weather Service. You know, the people that tell you the weather and help us prepare for hurricanes. So I say that as a former director of emergency management for the state of Florida, for a Republican governor, actually, who responded to hurricanes. You know, maybe if once we get rid of it, if Project 2025 were to succeed, if Trump were to win, maybe we'll just do it with a magic 8-ball or maybe with a Ouija board, or maybe we'll do hurricane cones like President Trump did, right? Where he just, you know, circled in another state that wasn't in the cone. So maybe what we'll do is we'll do hurricane predictions, like maybe it'll go to Mississippi, maybe it'll go to North Carolina, or maybe it'll go to all three. Oh, look, I made a smiley face. Maybe that's how we'll do the weather. You know, I could see it right now, right? Trump would come out and say, it's going to be raining cats and dogs today. Please don't eat them. And I want to end with this. I mean, literally 2 weeks ago, right, all we heard was about what the Haitian people were doing in Springfield. But no, the chairman wanted to top that. He literally brought a witness who proffered in this committee that the Haitian people would have been better off had they stayed in slavery for several more decades. Mr. Chairman, I want to spare you the embarrassment. You should strike his words from the record. No, you stand by his comment that the Haitian people would have been better off in slavery for 30 more years? Or should we strike that from the record? I just want to spare you that embarrassment. Okay, so the chair.
All right, your time's expired. Before I recognize Mr. Timmons, I would love to be a fly on the wall when you find out that Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential election and his son pled guilty for corruption.
Why didn't you impeach him? Wait, why didn't you impeach him, Mr. Chairman? Where's the impeachment vote?
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker, when's the impeachment vote?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I mean, we have a 300-page book report, tens of millions of dollars.
Chair recognizes Mr. Timmons from South Carolina.
Fake impeachment.